Hello, and welcome to the Three Links Oddcast, your podcast for all things having to do with Odd Fellowship. And now, here are your hosts. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the Three Links Oddcast. I'm your host, Toby Hansen.
I'm Ainslie Heilich.
And I'm Sergio Paredes.
And we're so happy to have all of you listening. Now, I know that based on our last episode, most of you are expecting we're going to be talking about Oddfellows cemeteries today. Ooh, spooky. But we've had to postpone that episode because our special guest that we had lined up lives down in Louisiana. And as some of you might have heard, they recently had a hurricane. And so we're giving him a little extra time to deal with his situation at home. And we are hoping for the best for all of our brothers and sisters and friends and other folks down on the Gulf Coast who've had to deal with that rather serious disruption to their lives. So instead, we've got a special episode that's very timely. Some of you out there in podcast land may have already heard of this, but the Secret Societies podcast from the Parcast Network recently did a 2-episode series on the Oddfellows. And we all listened to it and we thought, oh boy, that's really, some of it's kind of good, some of it's not so good. So in this episode of the Three Links Oddcast, we're going to be reacting to what we heard in the Secret Societies podcast. As always, we want to thank our wonderful, awesome, excellent sponsors, Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff from Missoula, Montana. They do excellent work. They make all these wonderful soaps and fizzy things and just great cleansing products for the bath. They've got their fall collection out now, so be sure and check them out on both Facebook and Etsy at Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brother Ainslie. Ainslie, what did you think about this whole podcast thing from Secret Societies?
Well, going into it, I had no idea how they were going to present the Oddfellows. That's always I always go in a little bit apprehensive when I find somebody's done coverage on us. So I always go in like a little hesitant, but I was very actually pleasantly surprised by the first episode, and I was very entertained by it. And they got a lot of information right, and they got a lot of deep information that isn't really easily accessible that they were able to share, and I appreciated the research that they put into it. The second episode, however, and we will definitely get into this as well, is where they kind of dropped the ball a little bit. I don't know if they did all their research and then kind of ran out of stuff they wanted to talk about, and so they started reaching, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But overall, I would say I viewed it very positively. I'll give it a B+.
That's not a bad grade. I would agree with that. I think that now myself, I've listened to every episode of the Secret Societies podcast because as soon as I heard about it, I thought I have to subscribe to this. Eventually they'll do an episode on the Oddfellows. And so I've heard all the episodes, and I know that they really like to sensationalize things because that's the only way that they can really make it seem interesting. All of us who are members, we know the reality of Odd Fellowship is that for the most part, there's a lot of business meetings, there's a lot of doing things, administrative tasks, things like that. There really isn't much in the way of goat riding, animal sacrifice, no sticking your hand in a bowl full of cold spaghetti or peeled grapes or anything like that. So we all know the sort of mundane truth behind these things because we've experienced it. But for people on the outside, you got to make it sound interesting so that they will listen. And so I thought the first episode was very informative, very well thought out, and especially well produced. The second episode just, I would say it jumped the shark, but that would be an insult to Fonzie from Happy Days because that episode went from promising to putrid in about 20 minutes. And I hate to say that because I love that podcast, they've done great stuff, like talking about Aleister Crowley and Anton Sander LaVey and some of the esoteric and occult secret groups like Ordo Templi Orientalis, things like that. Okay, they did a great job of that. But talking about Odd Fellowship, we are not that interesting. There really aren't any major international conspiracies. We're not behind international finance. We do not keep the metric system down. In fact, we have Odd Fellows in Canada and other countries who use and enjoy the metric system. Our sovereign Grand Master, Wes Nelson, he uses kilometers every single day. So we don't really have anything all that spooky or salacious to talk about. And that second episode really seemed like they were trying hard to make that happen.
Yeah, that second episode was kind of like, it started off good, and then once they started talking, it was just like full speed down the rabbit hole of wherever they pulled out that story from. So the first part was definitely like their crowning achievement, but that second one, they were just throwing pickles on the window at that point, trying to see what was going on.
And I do feel like there are some things that they, instead of focusing on a really far reach of a conspiracy theory, I do feel like there are things that would have been more compelling that are factual that they could have covered, but they just didn't feel like it, or they just had a different angle they were trying to push because of the program. So hopefully we can maybe touch on a little bit of that as well during today's discussion.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because for those of you listening who haven't listened to it, go to the Parcast Network, check out the Secret Society's podcast, and listen to the 2 episodes, because this entire episode of Three Links Oddcast is one giant spoiler. So pause our podcast, go listen to that, come back. So we're going to go through it basically point by point for what the major elements that they brought up in their podcast. So the first thing is the accuracy of the initiation. They actually dramatized part of the beginning of our initiation. And I thought they did a really nice job of it. It was mostly accurate. It was well produced. And I feel like they did a good job of setting up the sense of drama that the initiation is supposed to have. When we join the Odd Fellows, it's supposed to be a significant event where we feel like something has really happened, like we've really made a connection. And so it is supposed to be a profound and very, very noticeable instance when it happens and when it comes up. So I thought they created that sense of drama really well. And it really made me feel kind of bad for some of the members who have joined the Odd Fellows and haven't had that same kind of profound, dramatic moment at the beginning. Because I think that's what makes our initiation so special and unique in the world of fraternalism. And it's really one of the impressive parts of Odd Fellowship when it's done well. Now, unfortunately, yeah, there are members who've joined by watching the video of the initiation, and Walker Lodge in Philadelphia does a beautiful job of it, but it doesn't have the same impact to watch it as it does to experience it.
I agree completely. And I felt like watching, or I keep saying watching, listening to that first episode of the podcast, the drama and tension and apprehension that it captures it captured the same feelings that everybody under the hoodwinks deserves to feel and experience. And I agree with what you said about the feeling bad for the people who didn't have that initiatory experience, because that is the make or break moment. And that's what stays with us forever and cannot be repeated ever, watching from the outside, watching somebody else go through that process. So it was like, yes, this is exactly how it should be, but it's like, this isn't how it is across the board. And that's sad. And it's one of those things that points out the work that we have to do as Odd Fellows to bring that back.
Yeah. And I love the sort of intense, dramatic parts of our initiation. It's wonderful. And being a 20-year member myself, it is almost better to be a part of an initiation and see the reactions of your candidates as they're going through the initiatory degree and as they're discovering this new world of Odd Fellowship, and sort of the shock and the bewilderment of it, and that first sense that they have that they're becoming a part of the organization. That is an essential bonding moment when you really start to buy into the idea of Odd Fellowship. And it's unfortunate that some people haven't had that same kind of profound bonding moment in their initiation because they've either had a lecture form or the video or something like that. Now, Brother Sergio, as the newest Odd Fellow amongst us, you took your initiation at another lodge other than your own, correct?
Yes, I took it at the America Lodge, and when I was there, it was me and one or two other lodges that were also holding like a group initiation. So even though my lodge is smaller and probably we're able to do it, we kind of went to our neighboring lodge, America, and then we had, I believe, Costa Mesa Lodge, and I think there was one other one. For that one, they brought out the whole bells and whistles. So if you actually listen to the podcast, some of the stuff is pretty accurate. So I won't really go into details to what, but I mean, I'll let the suspenseful music do its trick.
Yeah, overall, I thought they presented our initiation in a really good light. They gave it the kind of gravitas and sincerity which it really needs. And I appreciate that about the Secret Society's podcast. I thought they did that really well.
They did that pretty good because the way the music went, when I did mine, the music could have easily gone with the moment, you know? Mm-hmm. Everybody's in full regalia. They have everything out. I mean, the music kind of sets up the same similar like environment that I remember pretty good on when I went through my initiation and everything. So that one was pretty dead on as far as setting the mood and kind of slowly walking you through by your hand. That one was they did a really good job on that part.
Yeah, I really liked how they did that, and I would hope that in the future, when members join and they join in a small lodge that can't do necessarily that kind of large presentation, I would say go back and listen to the first 10 minutes or so of the Secret Society's podcast, episode 1 about the Oddfellows, so you really get an impression of what it's supposed to be like when it is done at its absolute best. Now, another thing they talked about in episode 1 is our philanthropic legacy.
This was one of the things that I felt like they dropped the ball a little bit on, because they presented it as with the historical facts, which are true, but then it just kind of stops with the New Deal being offered, and that basically taking all the teeth out of the Oddfellows. And while they were correct in the assessment that we did kind of fail to pivot after that, it doesn't give acknowledgement to the fact that we actually are still a very philanthropic organization, and we still offer, with depending on locale to locale, some form of member benefit. And it might not even be like a financial benefit. It's other benefits that do come along with being a member, and the things that we still offer today that were not even, brought up, like the scholarship programs that we have, either at the jurisdictional level or at the sovereign level, and those are for members to apply for as well. Many lodges still offer a death benefit for members if they or a loved one passes away. And so there are things that we still offer that are maybe not to the same extent that they were back when we had the programs for, if you go to a lodge and they pay you out to set up, find wages for a little bit, and then they telegraph back to your home lodge to get repaid. Even though we might not necessarily do that anymore, there are still a lot of things that we do on maybe to a lower level, since, you know, we don't need, you know, to cover people's insurance, et cetera. So I do feel like there's a lot that they kind of omitted to kind of fill the narrative a little bit better, to make it just sound like all we do is just kind of hang out and not do anything anymore. And I felt like that was a little bit of a misrepresentation.
Yeah, and one thing they really missed out on there is when we stopped doing the direct member benefits as a large group. You know, we used to pay sick benefits, death benefits, unemployment benefits. You know, if the main breadwinner of a family was an odd fellow and he passed away, we would take care of the widow and the orphans. You know, it's in our motto: relieve the sick, or relieve the distress, bury the dead, visit the sick, educate the orphan. These are the things that we did as an organization. Well, when we moved away from that kind of direct aid, we refocused ourselves with a lot of charitable things out in our community. So there are a lot of local scholarships, a lot of local volunteer work, a lot of local donations. You know, my home lodge in Seattle used to host the Tuesday night community dinners in that neighborhood, where people could come and get a hot meal for free. So you had people off of the street who were down on their luck. They had a chance to come in, warm up for the evening, and have a nice hot meal. That stuff is still going on in lodges all around the country and around the world. We're still doing a lot of community-based philanthropic acts, although it's not necessarily member benefits anymore.
Yeah, like our last guest from San Fernando, they actually were still actively supporting an orphanage in Ensenada. So that's something that, you know, is an example that, you know, individual lodges could have their own eyes as far as where they want to get behind, as far as supporting and donating and all that good stuff. So that was the San Fernando Lodge, and they still actively participate and make trips to go to their orphanage in Ensenada. So that's just a example of people still kind of carrying that ethos even now in the current day and age and everything.
Absolutely. And add to that, one of the big programs we used to do all the time was we had our Odd Fellows homes. Some of them were for the elderly, some were for orphans. Some jurisdictions had both. I know in California you had both. Here in Washington, we had a combined home in Walla Walla, and now it is a senior care facility. We don't have an orphanage anymore, but for many years, if you were the son or daughter of an odd fellow and your father died, you could go to the orphanage and the odd fellows would take care of you and raise you until you reached the age of majority and you could go out on your own. And although we don't have the orphan component as much anymore, there are still many jurisdictions that maintain their odd fellows homes for the aged. And here in Washington, ours is consistently one of the top scoring senior care facilities. So we are still doing a lot of that kind of philanthropy as well.
In Illinois, we too still have our old folks home. It's not just members anymore. It is a public facility. And same thing, it's a very high rated facility. And interestingly enough, in Illinois, even though our children's home no longer physically exists, it still exists as an entity on paper, and it still owns the property. And the Grand Lodge offices are actually on the children's home property. And they have a bunch of land that's part of an endowment that they rent as farmland. So the income that they produce off of this farmland rental, the Children's Home Board then is able to give grants out to different lodges that apply for these grants to spend on anything to do with children. And so, for example, over the years, my lodge has several times gotten, different amounts of this grant, like $1,500 a year or $2,000 for a year. The most recent one we did was to help. There's a camp in the area for children with cancer, and they go to this special camp that They have 24-hour nursing staff there. They're able to get their treatments while they're at the camp. It just gives the kids something normal, some sort of normalcy for their lives. They could still get their treatment, and the parents get a week break. And so we got enough money to send 3 kids cost-free to go to this camp, the summer camp. But this was last summer, obviously. And so we still have our children's home doing work for the children in Illinois, and they give out tens of thousands of dollars in grants to lodges each year, and they don't get any of the credit. The lodges get all the credit, and it's a fantastic program, and we make great use of it.
Yeah, I know that your home for the elderly there in Illinois is very highly regarded. And I know that because one of the Rebeccas from my home Rebecca Lodge, where I first joined the Rebeccas, which was Salmon Bay 217 in Seattle. I've since transferred to Eola 63 in Buckley. But one of the Rebeccas there, she always said, when my time comes, I'm going to the Oddfellows home in Illinois because it's one of my favorite places. It's a wonderful place. I have old friends in the area. So after her husband passed away and after she felt she was done in Seattle, she moved back home to Illinois, to Mattoon, to the Oddfellows home there in Illinois.
So if she's still with us, then she's just 20 minutes down the road from me.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, another part that they talked about in the podcast, and I think they did a very good job on this, is one of the darker parts of our legacy in the Independent Order of Oddfellows, and that is the longtime prohibition on non-white members. As with so many elements of society from antebellum times, we had a real problem with reconciling the idea of universal brotherhood and non-white people coming together. That was a real problem. It wasn't as much of a problem for Oddfellows back in England. So what happened was an African, I don't know whether he was African-American or African-English, but of African heritage, he became an Oddfellow in England, came to America and said, "Hey guys, I'm an Oddfellow, let me join one of your lodges." That was 1843. That was Peter Ogden. And he showed up. And the American Oddfellows are like, actually, here in this country, we kind of keep you folk separate from the rest of us. And Peter Ogden's like, but wait a minute, we're all Oddfellows. We're supposed to be a universal brotherhood. And that caused a little bit of a conflict within the Independent Order because they frankly didn't quite know what to do because they were trying to be contemporaneous and participate in a very segregated, very separate society. But at the same time, they were also espousing this principle of universal brotherhood. So what Peter Ogden did is he went back to England and contacted the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, which is a different organization. I would kind of call them the uncle of our independent order here in North America. If you go back far enough in Oddfellows history, back into the 17th and 18th centuries, there were a bunch of different kinds of Oddfellows lodges. They would group together. One was the Patriotic Order, one was the Union Order of Oddfellows. A bunch of smaller groups of Oddfellows merged and became the Grand United Order. Eventually, the Oddfellows who came to America, Thomas Wilde, number one among them, they started Oddfellow lodges here, and they broke away from England for various reasons, one being that it was somewhat difficult to administer the organization across the Atlantic Ocean. So we became the Independent Order of Oddfellows for that reason. But early on in our history, the Independent Order decided it was whites only. And I've gone back and read some of the journals of proceedings from past years to see some of the ways that they were grappling with that problem. For example, when the Independent Order moved into Australia and New Zealand, those countries being on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, there were a significant number of Asian immigrants who were in those countries and wanted to be Oddfellows, and that presented a challenge. Similarly, just after World War I, about 1918 to 1920, there were a lot of refugees who came to the U.S. from the former Ottoman Empire, and they were Syrians or Turks or Armenians and various Asian groups, and they wanted to join the Oddfellows. And I remember one particular debate from the Sovereign Grand Lodge proceedings about 1919 or 1920, where they were debating the question of whether or not a Syrian could be classified as white for the purposes of joining the Oddfellows.
Wow.
So all this goes to show that our organization has had a complex and difficult relationship with questions of race. Now, eventually, this all got squared away. In 1971, we abolished the rule that you had to be white to be in the Oddfellows. And since that time, fortunately, we've had the opportunity to welcome many different kinds of people into the order. You know, if you look at some of the lodges on the East Coast, you look at particularly Excelsior #1 in Honolulu, there's much more diversity in the order now, and we're much the richer for it, because now we can look at everyone and say, yes, these are our brothers and sisters. But one of the things they mentioned in the episode, which I really liked, is although bringing the Grand United Order to America as the Black Oddfellows was something that was born of a significant amount of bigotry and racism, it actually ended up being a net positive for those communities that were served by the Grand United Order, because rather than being some sort of an auxiliary or an afterthought in a larger organization, African Americans got their own Oddfellows lodges, and they got their own system of support. They got their own community building. They got all of the things that were so desperately needed in those historically oppressed and underserved communities. A good example of that, if you're familiar with your Black history, the Auburn Avenue Business District in Atlanta was sometimes called the Black Wall Street, because there was a huge, wonderful, active, thriving community there on Auburn Avenue, the anchor of which was the Oddfellows Hall. And it was the Grand United Order, where African Americans got to have their own order with their own self-determination and everything that they needed as tools to build their community. So I like to think of the Grand United Order in the US as being kind of like the Negro Leagues. You know, I would have loved to have seen Cool Papa Bell or Josh Gibson spend their entire career in the major leagues playing against other major leaguers. But at the same time, they got an opportunity to do what they did extremely well and do it in a really supportive situation that could benefit their communities. So that's one thing where I really appreciate the job that secret societies did, because they really shared a lot of the benefits that the Grand United Order brought to our Black friends here in America, who had their own unique brand of Odd Fellowship. And they do continue to this day. We love the Grand United Order. They are Oddfellows every bit as much as the rest of us, and we really appreciate them. And there's been a lot more communication recently between the Independent Order and the Grand United Order. I was at Sovereign Grand Lodge in Baltimore in 2018, where we were fortunate enough to have an address from one of the members of the Grand United Order who came in and talked to us. And it was just this wonderful defining moment of Odd Fellowship. It was incredibly powerful.
I think one thing also that we might not realize from the Independent Order of Oddfellows side, actually the son of the guy that spoke at Sovereign, Brother Supreme Page from Columbia, South Carolina, he was their grand historian, I think is what his title was. And, you know, we text back and forth and stuff. And he told me that at one point, the Grand United Order of Oddfellows actually held more assets than the Independent Order of Oddfellows did. That because the type of membership that they were attracting to Black Odd Fellowship was the elite Black entrepreneurs of their their cities. And so they were investing into Odd Fellowship, and they're investing into each other and into their communities, and basically building this network amongst each other. And the Grand United Order apparently owned tremendous amounts of property. And even if you look at the buildings that are their former buildings in, I think the one in Atlanta is one of the ones that are they're just opulent. Just the care that went into these buildings is, you know, that they were wanting to depict the image that they were a very important, wealthy, strong organization. And even today, even though those buildings may not have been under their watch for many decades, they're phenomenal, just architectural masterpieces of craftsmanship. And there's a lot that the Grand United Order that we might not recognize today. The work that they did as part of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s and going all the way back to the 1860s. A lot of people might know about, the TV show Pose or the documentary Paris is Burning, or most famously the Madonna song Vogue. That's all, about the ballroom scene, which is for Black and people of color in the gay, lesbian, trans community in the cities. The Hamilton Lodge of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows started these balls as a fundraiser in the 1860s. And they did these balls for over 75 years as a fundraiser. And then when that lodge folded, like probably around the Depression or so, these smaller groups, these houses, as they're called, they kept that tradition going. And then that's what ended up turning into what became the documentary in the late 80s, Paris is Burning. And that's what Madonna saw. And then she ended up doing the Vogue video. And then that's, why we have the TV show Pose right now. And all of this great, legacy of queer culture was because of a fundraiser by the Grand United Order of Oddfellows Hamilton Lodge in Harlem. And I am so proud as an Oddfellow and as a queer person to have even like a kind of that uncle cousin tie to them in that way. And these are amazing things that they have done that just are not openly kind of discussed because of how history loves to whitewash everything and shuffle things around under the rug. And I hope that as we continue to work together with the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, and as more people become double odds, and hopefully we eventually do work to get that recognition between each other formally, some of this history comes to light of how, they were a cultural tour de force. They were a business tour de force. They were doing such things that we could only aspire to these days. So that was like a total long side tangent about if you look at what they did and what they're still doing, and there's so much that's important there that we can't forget that these spaces needed to exist. And I'm so glad that they did exist. And Peter Ogden was able to push through a no from the white Oddfellows in the United States in the 1840s to say, you know what, to heck with y'all, I'm gonna do it anyway. I'm gonna find another way and get this done. And I think it's just a fantastic story of Peter Ogden and everything that followed and everything that continues today. And they deserve far more recognition than what they're getting.
Yeah, and I think it also serves to reinforce the universality of the idea of Oddfellowship. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all going to find ourselves in times of great need. And so we need to be prepared to help each other out. I think a further testament to that is the incredible growth that Oddfellowship has had in the Philippines lately. In the last 20 years, it's gone from a relic of Manila Lodge that was started by American sailors way back when to a thriving group of lodges in the Philippines with their own Grand Lodge. I mean, our brothers and sisters in the Philippines are doing fantastic work, and we get to see that through the magic of social media. And it gives me a great sense of pride and accomplishment to know that these same ideas of Oddfellowship are taking root over in the Philippines, where people really deeply understand how powerful that idea is.
I was just gonna say, my as a new member, my limited interaction was with everything going on, I've been going on Zoom, multiple lodge meetings, Zoom meetings all over the U.S. And it wasn't until I attended, I think it was in Florida, I think, a Zoom meeting that was my first interaction, where it was just like everybody was talking, and then someone said like, "Oh, that must have been an independent thing." I was just like, what do you mean by that? And they're like, "Oh, well, we're from the Grand United Order." I was just like, "Oh, well, I didn't even realize there was much of a difference, because if you wouldn't have told me, I would have thought, oh, we're all from the independent order." So that's just kind of a testament to how right now everybody's still like deeply immersed and active with one another, to where, you know, sometimes unless they come out and tell you up front, you can't really distinguish the difference of, oh yeah, this person's with IOOF and this person's with GUOOF, and you know, it's just when we get together you really can't tell the difference, because on two occasions I've had that happen, to where it's just like, oh well, I'm from the Grand United Order and this is my lodge, and I was just like, oh okay. But it was an independent order Zoom meeting, and everybody was just, you know, getting together and just hanging out, but you couldn't really tell the difference unless someone, you know, volunteered that information. So that just kind of show you that when we're all together, you really, you know, everybody's kind of on the same level. There is no us and them or anything like that. It's pretty unique, and it's pretty awesome.
And I feel like that's something we have that might be a little bit different than the other fraternity out there. That there's always a lot of arguing online with the other fraternity, that, you know, do they recognize this member or not as a brother because they're of, you know, a different branch of that tree, or are they clandestine? And we don't have that problem in Odd Fellowship, that, you know, we of recognition, even though we might not have a formalized mutual recognition with the Grand United Order as set in the books of the Sovereign Grand Lodge Code of Law. I think, at least at this point in time, it might have been different before, but at least in what I've been witnessing is that everybody seems to have been like, you know what, like Sovereign's going to take its time on this issue. I know there's a lot of it because of like, well, the ritual's different kind of stuff, but we already are mutually recognizing each other as being, you know, cousins, or however we want to phrase it. We still acknowledge that we are related, and even though we might not have the same ritual or same whatever stuff, that we still have friendship, love, and truth, and that's really all that we need to depend on to recognize each other as brothers and sisters. Is, do we believe in friendship, love, and truth? Yes. Boom. You are my sibling.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we wouldn't have made it on the Secret Society's podcast if Odd Fellowship didn't have some salacious secrets. Ooh, secrecy. And they did talk some about that on the Secret Society's podcast. I thought they did an okay job with it. But I think it's important for us to actually address it, so that any listeners out there who've been wondering, hey, why do we have all these handshakes and passwords and things? Why do we have those, Sergio?
Yeah, I think they kind of briefly touched on it in the podcast, but pretty much before, you know, people were in their respective guilds, when they were going looking for work and traveling and everything, instead of having like a membership card, which was probably no good if you couldn't read it, they had their secret codes and their special grips and their special signs. So that way, even though you couldn't necessarily read the same language or articulate yourself, you could still kind of get the message across, like, okay, we're from the same place. Like, I am an odd fellow. Like, this is my grip and this is who I am. So those things had to be guarded, because once, you know, that became public knowledge, then, you know, what good is a secret if everybody knows? So those were pretty much, I think, the necessity that those came along, and now it's just more of, you know, tradition and ritual and just keeping the history alive and everything.
we're not giving out weekly unemployment or sick benefits to members anymore. So we don't need to guard against fraud the way we used to. But now it's fun to belong to a secret club where you have to know the handshake and the password and the sign to be recognized as a member. And it's one of the things that also makes traveling around as an odd fellow fun. I remember shortly after I joined, I went down to Southern Oregon and I was doing a show in Ashland. So on my off night from the theater, I drove over to Grants Pass and I attended Lodge at Golden Rule 22 in Grants Pass. They were so excited there my first night because they actually got to convene an investigation committee so that I could sit down and prove that I was an odd fellow. So they asked me the secret questions and I answered. I demonstrated my knowledge of the degrees and all of the stuff that they asked. I gave the traveling password and they welcomed me as a brother. I can go to any lodge anywhere in the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. And okay, to be honest, most of them aren't even going to know what the investigation process is like to have a visitor prove that they're actually a member. But still, it is amazingly cool to be able to go and by sharing some secret knowledge, being accepted as a brother or a sister when you visit a lodge in a distant place.
Yeah,
It's like
a
game.
Now,
it's like a role-playing game.
It is.
Yeah,
it absolutely is.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Now it's just like it's kind of like in school, you know. It's like me and them. We know something that everybody else doesn't know, and that's like the inside joke. I still get a kick out of it today.
It is like an inside joke a little bit. Yeah, it's like a little like wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Now,
That's right.
In the past, we actually had signs and phrases that we could use in public to identify a brother Oddfellow or to indicate that a brother Oddfellow was in distress. We don't actually teach those as part of the initiation anymore. But my home lodge in Seattle, they do like to share that information with initiates just because it's cool, because you can give the sign when you're in public and any other Oddfellow will know to give the corresponding sign so they know that you're a member. Or if you're in distress, you can give that sign and someone can come to your aid. That was really useful when every town had at least one Oddfellows Lodge and many of the prominent citizens in town were Oddfellows. It's almost useless now because if someone saw you frantically giving the sign of distress, say along the side of the road, they would probably think that you were in some sort of mental distress and call some kind of authority to deal with you.
Or doing a DUI sobriety test.
Sir, I'm going to need you to stop waving your arms around like that. So it's just fun at this point to have those kind of secrets and be part of the club. But really, we are not like hiding any unknown sea monsters or anything like that. The most exciting thing that happens is arguing about whether or not to pay the phone bill. So speaking of paying the bills, now would be a good time to take a break and drop in our commercial. But we got some exciting news for all of you. We have 3 Links Oddcast stickers. Woohoo! Ooh. And we've come up with a plan for how to distribute them to you, our loyal listeners. So Sergio, tell us about our new plan.
All right. So we're getting some stickers in soon of our podcast. They're going to be similar to what you see on our website. But if you want to get your hands on some, you could go ahead and just kind of take a screenshot, tag us in it on Instagram, or you could just take a screenshot of you listening to the podcast and then email it to us at our email. It's the number 3, oddlinksoddcast@gmail.com. So Instagram or email us, and we'll look at it, and the first 10 people we'll send out stickers and get those out as soon as we get them.
That's right. We want your help in popularizing this podcast. So if you tag us, the 3 Links Oddcast, on social media, and then send a screenshot to us to prove that you have tagged us, we'll send you a sticker. And that email address again is the number 3, 3linksoddcast@gmail.com. And we also have information about the sticker promotion on our website, which is 3linksoddcast.com. And that's with the word 3 written out, THREE, 3linksoddcast.com. So yeah, listeners, you have a chance to get one of our stickers with Ainslie's cool artwork on it. And
with the mic head.
That's right. The classic Shure 55 microphone that everybody loves. We are also debuting a brand new feature here on the 3Links Oddcast, and it's called the Lodge Shoutout. We realize that information travels around the Independent Order of Oddfellows somewhat slowly at times. So we want to help with the propagation of information. If there is really good news from your lodge, we want to know about it so we can share it. If you've just taken in a large group of initiates, or you've just had a successful degree rally, if you've just had a big fundraiser, if you've done something that you are really proud of and want to share with the wider world of Odd Fellowship, email it to us and tell us about it, and we will feature your lodge in the Lodge Shoutout, because we want to do what we can to spread the word about good things happening in Odd Fellowship. Our first Lodge Shoutout goes to a brand new lodge in the jurisdiction of New Jersey. Family Lodge number 293 was just recently chartered. I believe they're in Hamilton, New Jersey, which is a city that used to have a lodge many years ago and has gone quite a while without one. They chartered a brand new lodge, and they've already got officers. They're already starting to get active in the community. Brothers Will and Mario from back there in New Jersey were real major factors in getting this to happen. So the very first lodge shout out goes to Family Lodge number 293 in New Jersey. If you would like your lodge featured in the Lodge shout out segment of the 3Links Oddcast, email us, tell us your good news. We want to share it with everyone. It's the number 3linksoddcast@gmail.com. And with that, we're going to take a break. So we'll have some more right after this. You can feel it in that late summer breeze. Autumn is just around the corner with its chilly mornings and cozy evenings. Why not give yourself the gift of beautiful scented bath products? Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff is introducing their new fall scents for 2020. The soothing, calming smells of autumn are now available in all your favorite soaps, scrubs, and other bath stuff. Made of the finest ingredients right in rugged Missoula, Montana, Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff gives you a little bit of luxury in your everyday cleansing routine. The time is never better to pamper yourself than right now, because they've generously extended their special offer to listeners of the 3Links Oddcast. Use the code THANKYOU24 at checkout. That's the words thank you and the number 24 at checkout to receive 24% off your purchase. Once you've tried the smooth, wonderful bath stuff from Pig and a Pug, you'll want to indulge in a luxurious bath as often as possible. Remember, Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff. Look them up on Facebook and Etsy and use the code THANKYOU24 at checkout for a 24% discount. Happy bathing! And we're back. Thank you to Pig and a Pug for their wonderful sponsorship of the podcast. They pay for our hosting so that we can share this with all of you. Now, Ainsley, I understand we might have some skeletons in the closet.
Ooh. So this is a topic of popular discussion in many circles of the internet, be it oddity collectors, abandoned building enthusiasts, anything to do with the weird, occulty, creepy, spooky. There have been many accounts of skeletons being found in old Oddfellow lodges by the new building owners doing renovations. Me being a building owner of a Oddfellows lodge that I brought back, and I actually did find things that were hidden in the closets. I did not find a skeleton, but I did find collars. It was enough for me to definitely catch that Oddfellow flu from. The questions we get, unfortunately, the answers are so much more boring than the question about why do we have skeletons hidden. And they did a good job of handling it. They kind of played up the sensationalism a little bit, but then they brought it back down to earth on the podcast to reflect the reality of it being that it is something we use in our ritual as a depiction of mortality. And it's a literal memento mori, which is a common theme through symbolism as literally a reminder of death. And it's something for us to contemplate. A memento mori is something to contemplate, to basically remember that you're only on this planet for a limited time, and you live and then you will die, and your time is limited. And that's really, it's that mental exercise is what it represents, and our own mortality. And we're not actually killing people or sacrificing people or grave robbing or anything nefarious and doing satanic rituals with skeletons and telltale heart.
Your lodge isn't doing any satanic rituals? Didn't you get the code update?
I know, right? We should we need to update that. But yeah, like
go through the green book, put the satanic, it's chapter 47 in the Sovereign Grand Lodge Code, satanic rituals.
No.
Come on, Ainslie. Illinois.
It's right after the chapter of how to take care of your goat, right?
Exactly.
Yes. So it's one of those things where like the reality is far more mundane and boring than the pretend. And so I do feel like a lot of the mythos of the skeleton does kind of go up there with the mythos of the goat, of what are they doing with that? What does it do? And a lot of the sort of spurious side degrees really played that up a lot as well, to kind of, I don't know, almost make it seem like a funhouse element, as opposed to it being a contemplative symbolism device. And I, being a collector of these things, I actually have many of these skeletons in my possession. My home has become like the wayward home for lost scenes. Because I'm an artist, I think skulls and skeletons are cool. But I also feel like, I just have a duty to collect these things and bring them back to the fold. So that way they aren't on the private collection market. And, I'll even get it when I get my will updated. It's going to have specifically, these items are not to be sold. They're to go back to the Oddfellows. So they will never be left to be forgotten about in a lodge for 30, 40 years, only to be found by somebody doing a renovation to turn it into an apartment.
Yeah. I mean, the completely mundane truth is, we have skeletons and depictions of skeletons, because when you become an Oddfellow, you're reminded that life is short and we got to help each other out. That's pretty much the way it works. In the 19th century, we didn't have fancy plastic bones like you can get from Hobby Lobby or Joanne Fabrics or Michael's or some sort of other craft store. So they used real skeletons because those were skeletons. I mean, it was common for anatomy schools. It was common in medical schools. A lot of people, if they could not afford a burial, they would donate their body and the skeleton would be used for something, which in a way is actually a very beautiful way to let yourself live on and propagate knowledge. And so Oddfellows bought skeletons just like a lot of other places did in the 19th century. Well, they kind of over-sensationalized some of that in the podcast, talking about, well, what if this person was a slave, or what if this person was a servant? Okay, so when the forensic pathologist examined everything, it's like, oh yeah, they all died of natural causes. There was absolutely nothing nefarious. There was no murder. Nobody had their tongue ripped out and buried 6 feet out beyond the high tide, or, any sort of strange spookiness about it. No, they're collections of bones, and we look at them sometimes during initiation. Now, that's kind of enough for some people to go, oh, but what are you really hiding? Nothing. For $50, I will tell you all the secrets of Odd Fellowship. Fill out this application, come meet with the interviewing committee, and if we vote you in, we'll initiate you, and then you can start learning all of our secrets. There you go. But you got to play up the spookiness to keep listeners.
Right. It's kind of like the whole thing that's like, what's the big secret? The secret's that there's no secret, but the secret is keeping the secret that there's no secret, and that's the fun.
Yeah, and I think as far as that whole segment, they totally were just making it over dramatic than it needed to be. I can only imagine when they walk into like a high school science class and there's a skeleton in the corner. Right. They're probably like, what happened? What's going on here? Yeah. I think they just kind of really overdid it on that one, kind of like how they did in the beginning where they were like, oh, Oddfellows could date back all the way to Emperor Titus. And then they turn around and say, oh, but, that couldn't have happened anyway. So like they say this whole elaborate thing. And then in the same sentence, they're like, but this could all be just myth. I'm like,
But if they read it in the book that they got it from, they left out the part that all that stuff was written as satire about the early ancient origins. It was all like presented as, we're not like that other fraternity that tries to claim ancient origins. We just started as a need in the early to mid 1700s to help people, a guild for the guildless, So, but they did a good job with it. But even with the sensationalization, it gets, I get what they had to make it entertaining. Not everybody is going to want to hang around to just hear about a convivial drinking club from, the 1730s turned into a worldwide organization. That's a less spicy narrative.
Oh, but don't you know the ditch diggers on Solomon's Temple needed their own fraternity?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't forget the Israelites, too. We had to have them as well.
Oh, that's right, yes. The ancient Israelites. Well, that's where the encampment branch comes from, don't you know? Well, speaking of sensationalism, I was kind of embarrassed for the Secret Society's podcast when they completely veered off the rails and plunged down into the deep lagoon of the Somerton Man.
They jerked the wheel.
Yeah.
They did more than that.
For those who don't know, Somerton Man, or the Tamam Shud case, as it's sometimes called, a famous unsolved mystery in Australia, December of 1948. An unidentified man was found on a beach near Adelaide, Australia. He had no ID. He had a couple things in his pockets. And they found a little piece of paper in his watch pocket in his pants that was a clipping from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam from a special New Zealand edition. It said Tamam Shud on it, which is a Persian phrase meaning it is ended or it is done, it is over. So somehow they managed to invent, as near as I can tell, out of whole cloth, this bizarre, crazy, Dan Brown couldn't have come up with this crazy conspiracy theory that somehow the Somerton Man, this unidentified man found dead on Somerton Beach, had been killed by the Oddfellows and it had been covered up. Their only proof, if you could call it that, is, number one, the inquest into the death was held in an Oddfellows Hall, which is not at all unusual because Oddfellows Halls are very common meeting places. And number two, there is a special organization that Oddfellows can join called Amos, the Ancient Mystic Order of Samaritans. And all of the mythology for Amos comes from ancient Persia. It's from King Xerxes learning the lesson of humility. Okay, so it's kind of a Persian-themed order, not unlike our friends in the Masons who have the Shrine, which is kind of an Arabic theme. So we have Amos, we can join Amos, and it's got a Persian theme. And because there was a Persian phrase written on this scrap of paper, the Secret Society's podcast instantly said, aha, it's a connection to Amos and therefore to the Oddfellows. So they killed Somerton Man and they covered it up. There, see, we've done our homework. I can't imagine anyone anywhere who would say, well, there, that proves it. The Oddfellows are behind one of the world's great mysteries. Now, if it will get us more members, I will gladly take credit for Somerton Man. But the thought that a group of people who essentially meet twice a month in local lodges to discuss the possibility of giving $150 to the local food bank are behind some vast international conspiracy that somehow had to kill a nondescript white man in Australia for no discernible reason. It's just amazingly crazy. I mean, in one way, I'm flattered that someone took the time to try and make up a conspiracy theory for Odd Fellowship. I mean, that's one thing that the Masons have always excelled at. They get all the good conspiracy theories, you know, everything from stealing the Mona Lisa to toppling the Catholic Church gets ascribed to our friends, the Masons. And the Oddfellows are like, hey, someone give us a conspiracy theory too. And then we got the world's dumbest,
We got like
stupidest-
a second tier B-grade conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's like store brand macaroni and cheese that doesn't sell at the store and then ends up at grocery outlet. It's
We
like,
got our conspiracy theory from Wish.
yeah, here you go, Oddfellows. Here's Tasty Time macaroni and cheese with some hot dogs in it. I mean, that was just the stupidest, most insulting, embarrassing thing I think I've ever heard in a podcast. I couldn't believe it. Oh, well, the inquest was at the Oddfellows Hall, therefore the Oddfellows killed him. And see, he had a scrap of Persian in his pocket, therefore it's connected to Amos. Hello? I don't even know if Amos is active in Australia. And there is very little like organizational communication between the Australian Oddfellows and the North American Oddfellows. I mean, maybe it happened that someone from a lodge may have walked past Somerton Beach in December. Who knows? But there's like zero evidence that there's any connection. And that was just so absurd. I actually literally laughed out loud. I lolled in real life because it was so stupid.
Did you raffle though?
I didn't quite raffle. I was eating breakfast at the time. So yeah, the whole Somerton Man thing, yeah, it was complete absurdity. Now, the last thing that they talked about in the Secret Society's podcast is they did take a little bit of a contemporary snapshot of the organization, but I didn't feel like they really did their homework to find out a broad cross-section of Odd Fellowship. They did talk to a very esteemed member of our order, past Grand Master of California, Dave Rosenberg. And he gave a pretty accurate description of some of Odd Fellowship, which is the membership is older, and a lot of times the older members will move meetings to the afternoon for their convenience, and they'll say, hey, you know, it's just us 5 old guys, so let's meet Tuesday afternoons at 2:00 and do our best. But they really only gave that sliver of it, and I don't know if they actually talked to past Grandmaster Rosenberg and got real-time comments, or if they may have just sampled something that he wrote somewhere. But I didn't think that was a very accurate or faithful depiction of what Odd Fellowship is right now. I was disappointed in that.
I was as well. While if you want to zoom out far out, that all you can see is like that as a whole of Odd Fellowship and make a blanket assessment of, yes, Odd Fellowship is older. Yes, it is still going through a period of shrinkage, even though it's slowed shrinkage. It's, you know, like it's that rubber band snap already happened. We're in that slow kind of like trying to figure out where to rebuild next. And it completely just ignored the fact that like it shows like, yes, right now we are in maybe I don't want to say a dying off period, because that's disrespectful for the work that we've been doing over the last handful of years. But for the last maybe 75 years, yes, I would say that was a true statement. But I feel like, at least since I've been a member, the changes that I've seen each year are getting more and more and more. The energy has been building. Like, I've only been a member for 7 years now. And I don't know if it's just my own lens being distorted because the longer I'm involved, the more I'm seeing. Or is it the fact that there is more and more and more actually happening at the grassroots level, that individual lodges are finally, really coming back to life? Lodges are opening up left and right. I feel like, especially in the last 2 and 3 years, the changes that have happened in the last 2 or 3 years are hugely fantastic and inspirational. And hopefully they're motivating others to, and I think they are. And I want to say that, I feel like it's a little bit of a disrespect to the current membership who is trying so hard to say just a flat statement that Odd Fellowship is dying and there's really not much left and they all have their meetings in the afternoon and that's it, which is not the fact at all. And I would say a very small, tiny minority of lodges are lunch clubs, actually. And most of them do still meet in the evenings.
Here in my jurisdiction of Washington, I can think of one lodge that meets in the afternoon, actually 2 lodges that meet in the afternoon, and they're primarily older members. But what's happening here, I think, is representative of a lot of the change that is happening in Odd Fellowship. There are increasing numbers of young people, and by young people, I would say anyone from 20 to 40. They're professionals, and they're starting their professional lives. They're coming out of college. They're in their careers, they're having families, and they're looking for a greater sense of belonging. They're saying, yeah, I go to work every day, but I'm more than just my occupation. And I go home, but I'm more than just part of my family. I need some other place to be a part of something.
The third space.
I need something else in my life. Those people are finding Odd Fellowship. It's been especially true during the pandemic that people are reaching out. They're looking. I know you're seeing it because you respond to the emails to the Sovereign Grand Lodge website. I'm definitely seeing it locally. I've had many more inquiries from people about membership from just random people who say, I'm looking for something and I read about Odd Fellowship and this sounds like what I'm looking for. So, I mean, past Grandmaster Rosenberg is a wonderful statesman for Odd Fellowship, and he works with a lot of passion. And so I don't really want to lay any of this at his feet because I don't know if they actually really talked to him or just took some of his writings without considering the context. But there's really so much more to the story of what's going on in Odd Fellowship than just what was presented at the end of the podcast. For example, in the last 5 years, just off the top of my head, there's at least one new lodge in Texas, Plano 114, 2 new lodges in Louisiana, one in New Orleans, one in Alexandria, 2 new lodges in Georgia, Iron Links and Pride of the South, both around Atlanta. There's the new lodge that was just chartered in New Jersey.
And they've got another one on the way there.
Yeah, and there's interest, I talked about a couple episodes ago, Helena, Montana, reviving the old Montana #1, the guy who bought the old Montana Oddfellows home. He was reading about Odd Fellowship, and he said, hey, this sounds great. And La Crosse, Wisconsin is trying, and Richmond, Virginia. There are these efforts to revive Odd Fellowship as people out there in the world say, we need this. We need that sense of brotherhood. We need that belonging. We need groups of people dedicated to helping one another out. That's really important. And Odd Fellowship is starting to regenerate itself. It's coming up. And I think the best thing that I can say about this entire Secret Societies podcast was what you told me about Terry Barrett getting all kinds of calls last week from young people who want to join the Odd Fellows.
Yeah, he called me and he's literally said, I don't know what the heck happened this weekend, but I just got several calls in the last 20 minutes of my day of young people wanting to join. And I was like, it must be that podcast that came out. And so, you know, that's fantastic. We had a little blip in the numbers on the website. But I think the main thing is, just get more people just know we exist, since we've secret societied ourselves to death practically. And I think what a lot of these younger upstart members are kind of discovering in these successful lodges is that we're getting away from maybe the cohesive version of odd fellowship that we used to have in this nation, or under the Sovereign Grand Lodge on the continent. And I think we're going to start having more customized lodge experiences where the lodges are almost going to be themed, where, for example, like my lodge is the artsy fartsy lodge. So we do the artsy fartsy stuff. And we've got like a couple biker lodges that they focus on biker stuff. The lodge that's like 45 minutes or so from me, they're all gun enthusiasts. So they do a lot of gun raffles. And if you go down to like Waxahachie and Dallas 44, they have they do the parades with their Amos groups, and they do the mini bike thing, and they all have these very specific niches that they're starting to fill, that they're finding that within their community, this is what they need. And I think Odd Fellowship is going to shift to more of that grassroots DIY, homegrown, this is what we need for this town or this community. And it's going to shift away from it being a kind of this like across the board, exactly identical matchy sort of image that we try to kind of maintain. That's just my take of it. I think it's going to be a very individualized lodge experience going forward. And I think it's going to be a great thing because it's going to be a very diverse organization with a lot of different ideas coming in.
I agree with that. I think with the rise of social media, it has allowed a lot more DIY Odd Fellowship. This podcast, for example, the three of us got together and said, we want a podcast for Odd Fellows. And there are a lot of other great Odd Fellows out there who've had the same ideas, like Billy and Josh from Modern Goat Rider.
And we've all talked about it I feel like we've all talked about it together with Billy included, for several years now. And it's kind of, the timing just wasn't right. And then this COVID thing happened and it's like, well, no time like right now. But I love it. I feel like being an Odd Fellow, part of the appeal, I feel like for a lot of us is that at its core, Odd Fellowship is an underdog story, but it's an underdog story about overcoming hardship.
Yeah.
And that is the state we're in right now as Odd Fellows. Is our organization is still, and like we had that moment where we overcame our hardship in the, and we had this moment in the sun where we were just this huge, bloated, wealthy, glorious, Baroque kind of opulent thing, and you can't maintain that. You're going to collapse under the own weight of yourself and go like a black star, and like just like black hole after that. And now we're just kind of like a little white dwarf. I guess that's kind of what happens after you collapse, right? And we're not quite into that black hole moment yet, but we could still glow, but just in a different way. And know that like, yeah, this is our past, but we could totally evolve into something different and equally as awesome.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I love most, particularly about doing this podcast, but some of the other contributions I've been able to make in Odd Fellowship, I feel like we are giving a greater sense of belonging to people out there in very disparate lodges that don't have a whole lot of connection. A good example of that was the message we got from Facebook from Brother Braden, who belongs to Riverton 44 in Wyoming. There are not that many Odd Fellow lodges in Wyoming. There are not that many Odd Fellows in Wyoming, but he joined, and he has a really incredible, tremendous passion for Odd Fellowship now that he's in, and he's working on getting people together so that he can maybe restart the lodge in his hometown. And I see something like that, and knowing what that's like as a musician, because oftentimes there's a lot of isolation as a musician, working for yourself. You don't go to a workplace, and you're not going out and seeing colleagues and things like that all that often. To have that sense of belonging that goes beyond just your local place, to know that there's really a whole worldwide brotherhood. If a brother or sister showed up from the Philippines, I would be so excited to welcome them into my local lodge. Just like as I have traveled, I have been warmly welcomed in other lodges in other parts of the country. That's wonderful. And if you're in a small lodge that's not very active and not a really engaging lodge experience, but you can go home and listen to this podcast, or you can read The Heart in Hand, or you can participate in one of the Facebook groups, it gives you that larger sense of belonging that I think is really key to being an Odd Fellow.
And that's something that, you know, while you and I are both active components of the Sovereign Grand Lodge, we also know what the limitations are within that model. And we've been creative and clever enough to work outside of that model, but still be within the realms of what we're permitted to do, to just be like, hey, you know what? Like, we can't do like an official podcast of the Odd Fellows, but there's nothing stopping us from doing it anyway, and just being on here and talking. And so I think hopefully if other members are feeling helpless, or that they're facing some sort of pushback from their lodge, if they're having trouble kind of convincing the older members of their lodge to do something like clean the lodge up or let them in there to just kind of do some organizing, that there are other outlets to help get advice or find a way through some of those obstacles, because we've all been there to those obstacles, and we love to help, and we love to kind of offer positive feedback and ways to help inspire and motivate other members, because even though we might offer a way that doesn't work, it might be at least that one thing that helps them unlock whatever their setback is. And that might make them be that one member that helps bring that lodge back to having, you know, a full quorum every time. So if anybody is a member and they're in a lodge and they're just feeling frustrated, or they want to give up, just send us a message and we'll add you to the group thread and, you know, get you inspired and motivated to see that, you know, no, this is worth it. This being an Odd Fellow is hard. It's frustrating, but it's also can be fun and rewarding. And when you meet the right people that, you know, have put in the time and the work, and they still see the vision, then you know it's worth it. Because, you know, somebody like you, Toby, you've been here for 20 years and you've seen a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't really know, you know, you are still one of the more motivated, excited, positive members, you know, out there. And I think that shows, you know, as a testament that just because you don't get your way every time doesn't mean it's not worth it.
And, you know, for me, I feel like I'm in a position now where I can help channel and direct some of the energy of our new members who come in, and they realize how wonderful Odd Fellowship is. Mm-hmm. And so I hope to be able to use what I've accomplished in Odd Fellowship to be able to inspire others to start building up the fraternity, because one brick at a time, we can keep building to that foundation and making it strong and robust again, as it was when we were the world's largest fraternal order in the 1920s.
Yes.
So if you listen to the Secret Societies podcast and you hear that rather depressing end to it, where like, oh, Odd Fellowship is dying, everything is bad, boo-hoo, ignore that, because that's only a very small part of the actual truth right now. There's some wonderful active people, active lodges, some great groups out there doing wonderful Odd Fellowship and spreading the message. I always think of it like this. Odd Fellowship came to North America in 1819 with Thomas Wilde, who was, for the most part, an uneducated blacksmith, a coach spring maker. But the message of Odd Fellowship,
not even a top tier blacksmith.
Yeah.
Like they always make that point to be like, he was a blacksmith, but not really. He was just a coach spring maker. That was pretty like a low mid-tier blacksmith.
Yeah, he wasn't making swords. He wasn't doing anything really fancy. He was doing something very utilitarian. But his idea of Odd Fellowship was so compelling that it spread all across North America, and in fact, all around the world in the 19th century. You know, Valparaiso, Chile, Mexico City, Manila, Nagoya, Japan. There were Odd Fellow lodges all around the world in the 19th century, because people recognized what was needed there. And it didn't take someone who was necessarily articulate or brilliant to spread the message, because it was such a compelling message. Now, it helped that he had Ridgely with him, because Ridgely did the heavy lifting and a lot of the important writing and things like that.
Yes, he was the wordsmith of the order for sure.
He was, and that was important. But Odd Fellowship is still thriving and valuable today, despite what they might have said at the end of that episode.
Yeah.
So I think that pretty much wraps it up for our reactions to the Secret Societies podcast, which means it's time for the Odd Podge.
Woohoo. So Brother Sergio had to log off, so there'll only be the two of us tonight. I'll go first. So Toby, I hear you like a thing or two about the accordion, right?
As a matter of fact, I do.
I heard you. I heard you're into that. So you may have heard of Smiley Burnett.
I have.
So Smiley Burnett was a famous accordionist. He was with the cowboy scene there in like the 50s with the Roy Rogers, Gene Autry kind of scene there. He is from my town of Tuscola, Illinois, and he got his start on WDZ, which was a little radio station in town, which started off, I think, as like a farm station, and it became like the first actual broadcast network. I think outside of Chicago, it's like the first or the second radio station in like Illinois or something. And the radio station is still in existence. It's just not in Tuscola. It's like 50 minutes away in Decatur. Anyway, so he was a regular performer on this radio show. Well, this radio station was catty corner from where the lodge is. So don't have any proof yet, but I'm trying to do a little bit of research with the local county history museum that I'm the vice president of the association board of. We're trying to find some proof if Smiley Burnett played the lodge. Ooh. And if I could find concrete proof that Smiley Burnett actually played in our lodge, I'm going to name the stage after him.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, as long as we're talking about accordionists who played with Gene Autry, I am the proud owner of a 1938, I believe it is, Excelsior double-aught, and that belonged to Fred Martin. Now, Fred Martin was a very accomplished accordionist who did country western music. Starting in the 1930s, he had a band down in Texas. They used to play on WFAA out of Dallas. And his band was called the Cass County Kids because he and the other band members were from Cass County, Texas. So they had their big break and they played live on WFAA. Later, when Gene Autry was touring around after World War II and he was looking for a backup band to take with him to California, where he took Smiley Burnett, he was performing down in Dallas and heard the Cass County Kids and said, "Hey, how would you like to be my backup band out in California?" And they said, "Sure, that's a great idea. We would love to do that." And so they renamed the band the Cass County Boys, and they became Gene Autry's backup band that played with him in California, all the live events, the TV shows, and they did all of the recordings. So this Excelsior accordion that I have is the same one that Fred Martin played on all of those famous post-war Gene Autry recordings. When he recorded Jingle Jangle Jingle, Back in the Saddle, Silver-Haired Daddy of Mine. I own that accordion. It came to me from my friend Jack Cook, who passed away. He used to live in Las Vegas. He was in Los Angeles at Dave Caballero's accordion store. And when Fred Martin passed away, I think 2014 or so, his daughter brought the accordion in to sell it. And Dave said, "Well, this is a piece of music history. Why would you ever want to sell this accordion?" She said, "Well, my dad and Gene, they had a little falling out, and so he didn't want it to go to the Autry Museum. So she sold it, Jack bought it, and then after Jack passed, I got it. So I have Fred Martin's old Excelsior accordion. And, of course, Fred Martin played with Gene Autry, as did Smiley Burnett. So this has turned into the Gene Autry podcast.
That's a very interesting coincidence. That is, that was because we didn't coordinate that at all.
No, it's just we both somehow have connections to Gene Autry. You through being in Tuscola, and me through having Fred Martin's old accordion.
I'll take it. And that's the beauty of Odd Fellowship.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I'm Toby Hansen, and that's Ainslie Heilich. And Sergio had to jump off a little early because he had something to do with his family. And we would like to thank all of you for listening. Hopefully, we will do the cemetery episode next time. I'll get in touch with our guest and see if we can make that happen. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.